This chapter takes us deeper into the idea of how the social environment shapes us as human beings. Its central concept is that an individual whose activities are associated with others has a social environment. Their actions and capabilities depend heavily on the expectations, demands, approvals, and condemnations of others. We can't imagine a businessman conducting all his affairs entirely alone without considering buyers or sellers. Similarly, a manufacturer is just as truly socially guided in his activities, even when planning in solitude, because his plans will ultimately affect and be affected by others. Our thoughts and feelings, if they relate to actions in association with others, are as much a social mode of behavior as the most overt cooperative or hostile act. What is it to be a member of a society? It means to live among other human beings whose approval or disapproval we desire or fear, and who therefore exercise a selective influence on what we can do and be. The crucial point is that this influence is reciprocal, as the approval or disapproval of others depends on what we do and who we are. So our thoughts, feelings, and actions also influence others. We are not only shaped by our social environment, but we also shape it. Consider the following. An individual's beliefs, values, and norms exert a powerful influence on his or her behavior. In fact, individuals often act in accordance with those beliefs, values, and norms, even when there is no external pressure to do so. For example, a person may choose to be honest not because someone has forced him or her to be truthful, but because honesty is a value he or she holds. Such behavior is sometimes called voluntary compliance. However, even voluntary compliance has its limits. Imagine a person who does not approve of certain social norms. For example, a person may believe that stealing is wrong, but if he or she lives in a society in which stealing is common and accepted, that person's behavior may change. That is, he or she may steal even though he or she disapproves of stealing because the behavior is widely accepted and practiced in the society. In such cases, individuals are said to be engaging in what is called coerced compliance. Thus, the nature of the relationship between the self and society is dynamic and reciprocal. The self is both shaped by and shapes the social environment. This is known as the social environment approach to personality development. According to this approach, individuals are not merely passive recipients of social influences. Instead, they actively interpret and respond to social pressures, and they do so in ways that preserve and modify the values of their culture. In other words, individuals are agents who create and maintain their own personality within the context of their social environment. This view challenges the notion that individuals are simply products of their environment and highlights the active role that individuals play in shaping their own identity. It also emphasizes the importance of understanding the reciprocal relationship between the self and society in the study of personality. This was a complex topic, and I tried to simplify it as much as possible. All right, now let's talk about what the author means by training versus educative teaching. What's especially important to highlight is how this social medium nurtures its immature members. It's not difficult to see how it shapes external habits of action. Even animals, like dogs and horses, have their actions modified by association with humans. They form different habits because humans are concerned with what they do. Humans control animals by controlling the natural stimuli that influence them. In other words, by creating a specific environment. Food, bits and bridles, noises, vehicles are all used to direct the instinctive responses of horses. By consistently prompting certain acts, habits are formed that function with the same regularity as the original stimuli. Human actions are modified in a similar fashion. A child burned by fire will dread it. If a parent set conditions so that every time a child touched a certain toy, they got burned, the child would learn to avoid that toy as automatically as they avoid touching fire. However, up to this point, we are dealing with what can be called training, as distinct from educative teaching. The changes considered are in outer action rather than in the deeper mental and emotional dispositions of behavior. Nonetheless, the distinction isn't sharp. Conceivably, over time, the child might develop a strong antipathy, not only to that specific toy, but to similar toys. This aversion might even persist after they've forgotten the original burns, perhaps later inventing some reason for their seemingly irrational dislike. In some cases, altering an external habit by changing the environment to affect stimuli will also alter the mental disposition involved. Yet, this isn't always the case. A person trained to dodge a threatening blow will dodge automatically with no corresponding thought or emotion. So, we need to find a way to differentiate training from true education. The passage describes how external factors heavily influence both animal and human behavior. Animals, such as horses, can be trained by humans to perform certain actions through positive and negative reinforcement. For example, a horse can be taught to associate a specific response with a particular stimulus. Over time, these learned behaviors become habitual and automatic. Similarly, human actions can be modified by altering the environment and the stimuli within it. A classic example is the child who learns to fear a certain toy after being burned by it. In both cases, the behavior changes due to the introduction of new elements that influence the organism's actions. However, the author argues that there is a difference between this type of behavior modification and true education. To illustrate this, he uses the example of a child who touches a hot stove and learns to avoid it. This is a simple form of learning known as classical conditioning, where an organism learns to associate one stimulus, such as a toy, with a negative consequence, such as pain. In contrast, true education involves a more complex process that takes into account the mental and emotional aspects of behavior. This distinction is not always clear-cut, though, as the child in the previous example may develop a broader aversion to similar toys, even if they don't remember the pain associated with the first toy. This demonstrates how external habit can sometimes influence internal states, but it doesn't always happen. Ultimately, the author suggests that true education requires a more nuanced approach that goes beyond simply modifying external behavior. It must take into account the internal, mental, and emotional processes that drive human behavior. To achieve this, we need to move beyond rote learning and repetitive drills, and instead focus on developing critical thinking skills, creativity, and a love of learning. By doing so, we can help our students become not just obedient learners, but also independent thinkers capable of making their own decisions and shaping their own futures. So what do you think? Does this passage make you question the methods you use to teach and learn? Let me know in the comments below. What is the origin of our social ideas and emotions? This question was posed by William James in 1890, and has remained one of the central questions of social psychology. A century later, the problem still hasn't been solved. But I would like to suggest to you an answer that I believe is supported by the facts. The most important clue to the solution of this problem, I think, lies in the fact that a horse does not really share in the social use to which its action is put. You see, a horse can be taught to plow or to pull a carriage. In these activities, the horse has no interest. It doesn't seek out these activities on its own. The horse doesn't care whether it plows or not. However, the activity becomes beneficial to the horse because someone else uses the horse to achieve a beneficial result. The horse is made to get food or drink. In return, the horse gets something that it desires. But the horse, presumably, doesn't develop any new interest. It remains interested in food, not in the service it's providing. It isn't a partner in a shared activity. If it were to become a co-partner, it would, in engaging in the joint activity, share the same interest in its accomplishment as others do, and thus share their ideas and emotions. Now, in many cases, too many cases, the activity of an immature human being is merely manipulated to secure useful habits. They are trained like an animal rather than educated like a human being. Their instincts remain attached to their original objects of pain or pleasure. But to gain happiness or avoid the pain of failure, they have to act in a way agreeable to others. In other cases, however, the individual truly shares or participates in the common activity. And in that case, their original impulse is modified. They not only act in a way that aligns with others' actions, but in doing so, the same ideas and emotions that animate the others are aroused within them. Take, for example, a warlike tribe. The successes they strive for, the achievements they value, are all connected with fighting and victory. The presence of this environment incites bellicose displays in a boy, first in games, then in actual combat when he's strong enough. As he fights, he wins approval and advancement. If he refrains, he is disliked, ridiculed, and excluded from favorable recognition. It's not surprising that his original belligerent tendencies and emotions are strengthened at the expense of others, and his thoughts turn to things connected with war. Only in this way can he become a fully recognized member of his group. Thus, his mental habits are gradually assimilated to those of his group. But let's consider another example. Imagine a boy living in a community of artists where success and fame are achieved through painting, sculpting, music, writing, or acting. In this case, the boy will come to share in the aesthetic values that animate the adults around him. He will internalize the same ideals, goals, and emotions. His self-image will change as he begins to see himself as a creative artist like the adults he admires. This assimilation continues throughout life. We remain pliable throughout our lives, and we continue to pick up the habits of those around us. That's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who inspire you to be better. So, what's the conclusion here? Well, our ideas and emotions are produced by our participation in social activities. Our original impulses don't disappear, but they can be modified by participation in a joint activity. And it's in this way that we gradually assimilate the mental habits of those around us. We have seen in previous videos that, according to a popular theory, we mold our environment to fit our desires. And in another video we saw that we desire things because they promise us pleasure and because their acquisition is easy. If we formulate the principle involved in this illustration, we realize that the social medium neither directly implants desires and ideas in the mind nor merely establishes purely muscular habits like instinctive winking or dodging a blow. Its effect is indirect. The first step is setting up conditions that stimulate certain visible and tangible ways of acting. The completing step is making the individual a sharer or partner in the associated activity, so that they feel its success as their own success, its failure as their own failure. As soon as they are imbued with the emotional attitude of the group, they will be alert to recognize the specific ends the group aims for and the means used to achieve success. Their beliefs and ideas, in other words, will take a form similar to those of others in the group. They will also acquire much the same body of knowledge, as that knowledge is an ingredient of their habitual pursuits. The importance of language in gaining knowledge is likely the main cause of the common notion that knowledge can be directly passed from one person to another. It almost seems as if all we need to do to convey an idea into someone else's mind is to convey a sound into their ear. This makes imparting knowledge seem like a purely physical process. But learning from language, when analyzed, actually confirms the principle just laid down. It would likely be readily admitted that a child grasps the idea of, say, a hat by using it as other people do, by covering their head with it, giving it to others to wear, having it put on by others when going out, and so on. But one might ask how this principle of shared activity applies to understanding. Through speech or reading, the idea of, say, a Greek helmet, where no direct use of any kind is involved. What shared activity is there in learning from books about the discovery of America? We must distinguish between two ways in which we can use language to gain knowledge. One is by producing the sounds ourselves. The other is by merely listening to them produced by others. Our knowledge of the world around us has two main sources, our senses and language. Language is derived ultimately from sense experience, insofar as it is used to convey knowledge of that sort. It does not add anything that is not already known to us through our senses. A child listening to stories about a farm and its animals gradually builds up a conception of what a farm is, and when later it sees a farm, it recognizes it as something known. Likewise, when we listen to a description of a Greek helmet, we build up some conception of what a Greek helmet is, and when later we see one, we recognize it as such. But the case of language as conveying knowledge is more complex than this. For not only do we listen to the sounds produced by others, we also produce them ourselves. The sounds of language are produced and reproduced in our own speech, and in that process we add something to the knowledge conveyed by our senses. That is to say, we do not merely receive knowledge from others, we produce it ourselves. The mere fact that we can repeat a sound or a combination of sounds does not necessarily mean that we know what it refers to. We may know the sound, but not the meaning. Hence the child who has learned to say, "I want a hat," may not know what a hat is. On the other hand, we cannot use language to produce new knowledge. All the knowledge it conveys is already present in our minds. All language does is to help us to arrange it. Thus, language in conveying knowledge does not differ from our senses. Both convey particular truths about the world. But while our senses convey truth by direct contact with objects, language does so indirectly. We cannot learn directly from language because we cannot use it without reproducing it. To learn from others, we must listen to their speech, reproduce their sounds, and then check whether our reproduction agrees with reality. In checking, we use our senses. So, in the end, both senses and language lead us to the same knowledge, but language does it the longer way round. Therefore, we cannot learn from others without using our own senses, nor can we use our senses without the aid of others. We must first learn to use our senses by means of others. So in the end, learning from others is really learning from our senses. It is the function of language to stimulate our senses. This explains why speech is more effective than writing. Writing lacks the stimulating force of speech. Therefore, though we can learn from books, we cannot talk with them as we do with other people. We can get information from books. That is to say, we can learn from books, but we cannot learn from them everything. Since language tends to become the primary instrument for learning about many things, let's examine how it works. A baby, of course, starts with mere sounds, noises, and tones that have no meaning, expressing no idea. Sounds are just one type of stimulus for direct response, some soothing, others startling, and so on. The sound H-A-T would remain as meaningless as a sound in Choctaw, a seemingly inarticulate grunt, if it weren't uttered in connection with an action participated in by multiple people. When the mother takes the infant outdoors, she says hat as she puts something on the baby's head. Being taken out becomes an interest to the child. Mother and child not only physically go out together, but both are concerned in the going out. They enjoy it in common, by conjunction with other factors in the activity. The sound hat soon acquires the same meaning for the child as it has for the parent. It becomes a sign of the activity into which it enters. The mere fact that language consists of sounds that are mutually intelligible is enough to show that its meaning depends on connection with a shared experience. In short, the sound H-A-T gains meaning in precisely the same way that the physical thing, hat, gains it by being used in a given way. And they acquire the same meaning for the child as they have for the adult, because they are used in a common experience by both. The guarantee for the same manner of use is found in the fact that the object and the sound are first employed in a joint activity as a means of establishing an active connection between the child and an adult. Similar ideas or meanings arise because both persons are engaged as partners in an action where what each does depends upon and influences what the other does. If two primitive hunters were on a joint hunt and a certain signal meant move to the right, to the one who uttered it, and move to the left, to the one who heard it, they obviously couldn't successfully carry on their hunt together. Understanding one another means that objects, including sounds, have the same value for both with respect to carrying on a common pursuit. In brief, the key point about language is that its function is to connect people in a joint activity that is its ultimate origin. As far as we can tell, it does unjust grow out of people's need to express themselves or to fulfill some other psychological function. Language arises in order to get something done, and the thing is always getting done together with someone else. Its development as an instrument of communication begins with the bringing into connection of people who do things together. In order to understand how this works, we must consider the notion of an activity system. An activity system is a situation in which two or more persons engage in a joint enterprise. Joint is the crucial word here. It's only when there's a joint activity that there is need for coordination and hence for communication. But the activity may be anything from building a house to killing an animal, from hunting and gathering food to planning a campaign or even playing a game. The important thing is that those taking part must coordinate their actions with one another if they are to attain their ends. Each person's behavior is modified by the behavior of the others. An activity system, therefore, involves a structure of interdependence among participants. This means that if the activity is to continue, each person must take into account what the others are doing and adjust his own behavior accordingly. He must know what the others are doing, and he must know that they know what he is doing. In such a system, if each individual acts only out of regard for his own private purposes, the system falls apart. The activity cannot be completed. But if each person acts in accordance with the expectations of the group, the activity will tend to be completed successfully. An activity system, therefore, involves a set of expectations. Each participant must know what the others expect of him. Indeed, in any system, there are a number of expectations that are tacitly understood. For example, if one is working with a tool or machine, one expects that it will behave in a certain way. If one is riding in a motor car, one expects that it will go forward, not backward. If one joins a baseball team, one expects to be hit by the ball, unless and until one is out. Expectations like these are built up from past experience. They are tacit because they are called into play by the situation, and they guide our conduct without any conscious decision on our part. Of course, in some situations, we are explicitly told what we should expect. The point to be emphasized here is that the expectations operative in any situation are determined by the nature of the activity system within which that situation occurs. The nature of these expectations, like the nature of the activity itself, depends upon the particular roles that individuals play in the system. The success of any activity system depends upon the coordination of the actions of its participants. This is achieved by the use of signs, signals, and symbols. The most highly developed of these are, of course, words. But other kinds of signals, such as the movements of the body, or arms and hands, or even sounds, may be used. The crucial thing is that these signals have a conventionalized meaning for all participants. They are known to stand for certain expectations, and they call forth certain responses. So far as we can tell, language began as a specialized instrument for the coordination of activities. At first, its use was limited to the expression of desires and simple reactions. But it soon became possible to employ language for the description of states of affairs, and finally, it could be used to convey propositions. The earliest forms of language, therefore, coincide with the dawn of human thought. The capacity to use language is thus intimately connected with the capacity to think, and both capacities develop simultaneously, each serving as a stimulus for the development of the other. The interrelation of language and thought is so intimate that it's impossible to determine which is prior. This piece of chalk has no meaning. It's just a piece of chalk. It's merely a physical stimulus that sets certain processes in the brain going. The teacher uses it as a tool to convey certain ideas, but these ideas only arise in the pupil as a response to the stimulus. There is no meaning inherent in the chalk itself, nor in the word chalk. In order for the word to convey an idea, there must be some connection between the thing and the idea. This connection is made deliberately by the teacher. He picks up the piece of chalk and says, "This is a piece of chalk." The chalk, as a physical object, is connected with the idea piece of chalk. But this connection is quite arbitrary. It doesn't follow necessarily from the nature of the thing itself. The piece of chalk could just as well have been connected with the idea weapon, and then the word chalk would have acquired a completely different meaning. It's only because we have previously had experiences with pieces of chalk that we understand the word chalk to mean a piece of writing material. If we had no such experiences, the word would be meaningless to us. It wouldn't convey any idea. But once we have formed a connection between a particular thing and the idea that it represents, we can use that connection to form new connections. For example, after we have learned the meaning of the phrase Greek helmet, we can use that phrase in conjunction with other similar sounding phrases like Roman helmet or Goth helmet to develop new meanings. The meaning of these new phrases is developed precisely as the things they represent are combined. That is to say, if we were to use the phrase Greek helmet in a context that implied a combination of the things it refers to, say, in a sentence like the Roman helmet was an improvement on the Greek helmet, the listener or reader would be prompted to imaginatively rehearse the activities in which a Greek helmet has its use, and then to imagine how those activities would be performed with a Roman helmet. In other words, the listener or reader would be prompted to mentally combine the two helmets, and so the meaning of the new phrase would be developed out of the meaning of the original phrase. Thus, the words through which a child learns about, say, a Greek helmet originally gained meaning, or were understood to express an idea through use in an action with a common interest and end. They now evoke a new meaning by prompting the listener or reader to imaginatively rehearse the activities in which the helmet has its use. Most people probably stop at the idea that helmet denotes a strange kind of headgear a people called the Greeks once wore, and so they would understand the phrase Greek helmet to mean a helmet that the Greeks wore. They would not understand it to mean a helmet that someone other than a Greek might wear. We conclude, therefore, that the use of language to convey and acquire ideas is an extension and refinement of the principle that things gain meaning by being used in a shared experience or joint action. In no sense does it contradict that principle. And if you need a reminder of that, then you can always re-watch this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe.